Morning, everybody. So today we're going to talk about parts and some part strategies. Now, some owner operators don't care about parts. They don't spend any time on this whatsoever. So whether you do or whether you don't, that's totally up to you. So some owner operators like to talk about parts. They like to buy parts. They like to research parts. Other owner operators could care less. So this is something that I feel is an opportunity to save money. Um, just like we talk about discounts and how you can take advantage of discounts. Well, you can maximize your purchasing dollars by paying attention to parts. So there are different types of parts. There's OEM parts and then there's aftermarket parts. OEM is original equipment manufacturer. Aftermarket parts are, you know, the the brand names that you don't recognize. They're not the top brand names. So for example, if you bought a filter from Freightliner, that might be an OEM filter. But you could buy that same filter off of Amazon for a fraction of the cost. And it'll be some cheap knockoff from China. So does it perform just as good? In many cases, it does. In many cases, the aftermarket part performs just as good, if not better, than the OEM part. But it does vary from part to part. So let me give you an example. If you had a diesel powered APU like a Thermo King Tri-Pack Evolution, and you went to look at the hoses on that APU, Thermo King charges outrageously high price, like $75 or more for a coolant hose. You can get a similar hose from thermal byproducts for one third the cost. However, when you compare the two parts side by side, they're not the same. The Thermo King hose is a much better hose, higher quality, better construction, thicker material. It's gonna have more reliability for wear and tear, less likely to break down. That cheap hose from thermal byproducts, man, I tell you what, that thing's pretty thin. I don't know if I'd want to put that on my APU or not. Some guys do, but there are difference in quality of parts. Now, in many cases you get what you pay for. Sometimes when a part costs more, there's a reason why it costs more. It's higher quality, better construction, more reliability, things like that. Other times, you're just paying more for a brand name for no reason. And the parts that I most commonly purchase are air filters, filters of all kinds, belts, and hoses. So if you look at filters, you're looking at your engine air filter, your cabin air filter, maybe a coolant filter. Maybe you don't. Nowadays, I don't think the trucks have a coolant filter. A depth filter. Anything that has a fluid typically has a filter. So you can get all those filters on your own. And if you have a serpentine belt and another belt, the alternator belt, especially if it's an APU. And an APU, you'll have a water pump belt and you'll have an alternator belt. And then on your engine, you'll have your serpentine belt. Um, if you're driving in remote areas like the Rocky Mountains, deserts of Arizona, California, if you throw a belt on your APU, for example, you better have a spare one with you because you're relying on that APU for air conditioning. But same thing with serpentine belt. If you're in the Rocky Mountains and your serpentine belt breaks, you know if you have a spare with you, then you can call a mobile mechanic and he can put it on. But if you don't have a spare with you, this typically what happens. The mobile mechanic comes out and says, "Oh, your serpentine belt broke." And you're like, "Yeah, I told you that on the phone." He's like, "Yeah, but I had to look at it myself." So he drove 50 miles to come and verify what you told him was true. Like, okay. He goes, "You need a new serpentine belt." And you're like, "Yeah, I know. I told you that on the phone." He's like, "Okay, well, Nearest Freightliner is 200 miles away. So I will go to Freightliner and go get you a serpentine belt, and I'll come back. And meanwhile, he's charging you probably $100 to $200 for a service call. Then he's charging you by the hour, and then he's charging you by the mile. So by the time he goes and gets that serpentine belt and brings it to you, puts it on your truck, that breakdown could be several $100s for, a part that's probably $100. But this is the games that mobile mechanics play. They're there to help you, but you're gonna pay through the nose, because they don't carry the parts on their truck and they don't have it in inventory. But if you have what I would call critical spare parts in your truck, especially if you're driving in remote areas, it's one thing if you're driving, you know, in the Midwest and there's a Freightliner every 50 miles. It's another thing when you're driving in the Rocky Mountains. The Freightliner is 500 miles away. So I mean, there's no civilization out there. So if you need something, you better have it on your truck. You can get a mechanic, but can you get the part? So there are critical spare parts that you may want to think about carrying. It's just I would carry, if I was in remote areas, I'd carry an extra serpentine belt just in case mine broke. And you may never ever use it, but it's there for emergencies. If I had a diesel powered APU, I'd carry the belts for that. Plus, I would carry more parts for that APU. I would carry a water pump, an extra fuel pump, carry those two belts. I might carry a full PM kit for that APU, which would be the oil filter, fuel filter, and the air filter. Because sometimes these APUs, they get temperamental, and it's like, well, I don't know what the hell's wrong with it. Let me do a full PM on it and see if that fixes it. So, but that's critical spare parts. Now, you may want to have spare parts in your home at your, what I would call inventory. So if you go to buy a cabin air filter, well, you wouldn't necessarily just buy one. You'd buy 12. So and keep the rest of them in your inventory. A lot of times I like to have two engine air filters. Instead of, if I find a good deal on engine air filters, instead of buying one, I'll buy two. I'll put one in my truck right away. I'll replace the old one, and then I'll have a spare in my inventory. For example, you don't have to do that. It's just personal preference. If you look at the cost of parts, typically, prices are jacked up, especially if the price, for example, if you go to a local truck repair shop, again, we're going to talk about Joe's Diesel Repair. Well, Joe's Diesel Repair has to make a profit. Okay, so first thing he's going to do is he's going to cut his costs by putting aftermarket parts on your truck. So he's going to shop around. He's going to find the cheapest parts he can find. Now, is he going to pass that cost savings on to you? No. He's going to charge you full price. In fact, if it cost him $50, he's going to charge you 1.5%, 50% on top of that. So an extra 25 bucks. So it cost him $50 for that part. He's going to charge you 75. Because Joe's got to make a profit. It's like he can't do this stuff for free. So he's shopping for aftermarket parts. Parts is a very big business, very, very, very big business. A lot of money tied up in parts, and there's a lot of activity that people do to research parts, try to find the right part, right price, good quality, things like that. There's a general rule of 3 that I like to use, and that is, if I'm looking for a part, I want to find 3 sources of price information. So I will look for the part on Amazon. I'll look for the part on eBay, and I'll see what the price is I can get from Crete, because Crete will give me the discount. So even though I'm an owner-operator, they'll pass on their pricing on to me, because in parts, the more you buy, the cheaper it becomes. You get the volume discount. So Crete has, 7,000, 8,000 trucks. They buy filters all the time. They don't buy them one at a time. They buy them at hundreds at a time, maybe thousands at a time. So they get a big discount. So if you can get it to part through Crete, you can get that discount. So you want to compare the prices. It's like, well, Freightliner's charging this much, Crete's charging this much. I can look at Amazon. This is what the price is there. I can also look at it on eBay, maybe even Facebook Marketplace. So there's a lot of research that goes into sourcing parts and trying to find the best deal. Now, I will caution you that sometimes the best deal ain't worth buying. There's times when I buy a filter, and I get it. It's the cheapest damn filter that you could ever imagine. And you hold it up to the sunlight, and you can see right through it. And I've bought parts. When I receive them, I inspect them, and I'm like, there ain't no way in hell I'm putting that part on my truck. It's so flimsy. It's so cheap. It's about worthless. Yeah, it was lowest cost, but it was lowest cost for a reason. It ain't worth nothing. It went right into the trash. So there's a lot that goes into parts. Some owner operators really get into it. I think if you get the type of owner operator who likes to do DIY maintenance, which is do it yourself, or they were a mechanic in earlier part of their career, then they bought a truck. They're really into parts. I mean, they go into great detail parts, and they could tell you, not only the part number, but the company that makes the part. So they're like, oh yeah, Baldwin filters. You'll hear these names floating around every once in a while. Guys will throw out these brand names. Baldwin's a big one. Wix, Wix, Lubrifiner. They make good filters. Things like that. And then the guys can start chewing the fat, and they're like comparing, contrasting, different brands. You like Lubrifiner, another guy likes Baldwin, another guy likes something else. Just fine. This just guys demonstrating their knowledge of parts and the part manufacturers. I find it kind of interesting, but it's like, do you know the part number for your air filter? Maybe not. Well, where do you find all these part numbers? It's like, well, you get your part numbers wherever you can, but most commonly, if you have a work order, like say you're at Freightliner and you put in a work order and you get your invoice, and it'll say on there, replaced, def pump filter, and it'll give you a part number. Well, then you write that pump number down. You create a little cheat sheet, or you keep it recorded on your phone, or you put it in an Excel spreadsheet, or wherever you want to put it. You write down that part number. And you start looking at all your work order histories, and whether you get a work order done at the terminal, or the Crete terminal, or Freightliner, or a local repair shop, they should be writing down the part numbers, the parts that they put on your truck. And you just start collecting part numbers. It's like a hobby. It's like some people collect stamps, other guys collect part numbers. Another way to do it is, you don't know your part number, just call Freightliner service desk, give them the last 6 of your VIN, and say, I need a part number lookup, and they'll look up your part number. More and more companies are coming up with apps and online tools to help find part numbers. And I know, like Diesel Laptop, they have a software feature called parts lookup or parts reference or something like that. And the thing with part numbers is, like, say Baldwin has a part number for your air filter, but it's not the same part number as Lubrifiner. And it's like, well, crap. Now you need the part number for Baldwin, you need the part number for Lubrifiner. That could be, but a lot of times if you're shopping online and you're looking at a part, it'll say, okay, this fits a 2019 Freightliner Cascadia 126 model, and it'll say not only does it fit your truck, but it'll give you cross-reference part numbers. So that's very, very helpful. So now you're collecting the OEM part numbers, and now you're collecting the cross-reference part numbers. See how this becomes a little more complicated the deeper you get into it, and this is why parts is a very big business. Because if you go talk to the parts manager, if he talks to you at all, we're usually very, very busy. You know, this is what they do all day. They check part numbers, they cross-reference part numbers, they shop for the lowest price, they build their inventory, they maintain their inventory, they reorder supplies. You can get rubber grommets by the piece for your clad hands. Sometimes you can get them. If you go to a truck stop, you might get like two for $1, or two for $2. What truck stop prices are outrageously overpriced. They're like 100 to 200% markup on those parts. But if you shop online like Amazon, you can get those same rubber grommets by the piece count. It'll be like you can get 100 of them at a time. And then what you want to pay attention to is the price per piece. So like say at truck stop they're charging you 50 cents per piece. Well, you can get that same part on Amazon for like 10 cents per piece. So you want to pay attention to that, because in consumable items you're often paying, by the piece count, and the higher volume, the more bulk you buy, the lower the cost per count. So 100 of them lowers the price per piece versus buying one. You buy one, that might be $1. You buy 100, now you're getting a volume discount. So that's something to look at. Same thing with buying fluids. It's like, oh, you're going to buy washer fluid, you're buying engine oil, you're buying coolant fluid. So if you shop around, I mean, if you buy a truck stop, you're paying outrageous for that coolant. That oil, that windshield wiper fluid. I mean, just go to Walmart and buy it. It'd be cheaper. But you can buy it. Look at the price per fluid ounce. That's what you want to pay attention to. If you buy a little tiny bottle, the cost is higher per fluid ounce. But if you buy it and by the gallon, the cost per fluid ounce comes down. So this is what guys think about when they're purchasing supplies. They're like, look, there's an opportunity here to save money, but I got to buy it cost. That's why they go to Sam's Club. That's why they go to Costco. They buy it in bulk. It lowers their cost per piece or per fluid ounce, or per item, and then they keep it at home in inventory. I have a storage unit. I have a 10 by 20 climate controlled storage unit. I like to keep my inventory in there. There are times when parts are hard to find. During the pandemic, for example, good luck, man. Parts were on back order, and it can be very, very difficult. And then this comes where your strategy is. If you had a little bit of inventory, then you were able to get through that pandemic relatively unharmed. But if you needed a water pump for your APU during the pandemic, 3-month back order, you couldn't find a water pump anywhere. So then you got to start thinking about things ahead of time. It's like, well, I just bought an APU. What parts should I keep in inventory? It's like, maybe you should invest in some inventory. It's like, well, odds are I will probably need to change that water pump and fuel pump belts and hoses while I own that APU. So let's buy them now, and that way I have them in my inventory in case there's a part shortage, and then you won't be able to get it nowhere. So that's something to keep in mind. It's emergency planning. Maybe it's like being a prepper to an extreme, but when everybody else doesn't have that part, you'll have that part. You have it in your inventory. Now, if you sell your truck and you sell your APU, you might want to include with the sale all your spare parts. What are you going to do with all these spare parts if you don't have an APU? So that's something to think about as well. But I can tell you, having bought a lot of parts over the years, there's difference in quality, and when I buy an OEM Thermo King Tri-Pack Evolution water pump, and it costs damn near $300. Then I go buy the cheap Chinese knockoff, and it's like $75. There's a huge difference in the quality of those parts. Huge difference. So you might want to give that some thought. It's like, yeah, you could save money and cut corners and get discount, but do you really want to? Or would you rather pay full price for that OEM part? You know, some guys, are very, very resourceful, when it comes to parts. I mean, they will go to AutoZone and they'll find a part for, that was designed for a car, but it's a lot of times parts cross over different pieces of equipment, different industries. And it's like, oh yeah, you can get that same thing at AutoZone for half the price. It's the same part, but you're getting it at a car parts store. You're not getting it from Freightliner. It's like, what? Yeah, it's possible. Some guys know these parts. They know. I mean, they're like experts. They're like bloodhounds. They're on a mission. They're going to find these parts. They know where to find them, and it's a popular discussion thread on Facebook, for example, is parts. So do you have to know parts as an owner operator? No, you don't have to. You don't have to. Should you? No, not necessarily. Could you? Yeah, you could if you wanted to. You can make it a hobby. It's like, do you know the size of your windshield wipers before they break down? Do you know if they're 22 inch or 24 inch? Well, that makes a difference. Because if you need to replace your wiper, you need to go online and order it. You got to know what size wipers you have. Or if you're going to stop at truck stop, you're looking at 50 different types of wipers. It's like, well, I think mine's 22, and then you put it on your truck and you realize you should have bought the 24. So if you did some parts research ahead of time, you would have known you had 24-inch wipers, and you write that down on your cheat sheet or you save it on your phone. That way, when you need to go, buy a wiper, it's right at your fingertips. And you don't have to have your part numbers memorized. Just write it down so you can quickly look at it. It's like, I give you 5 seconds. Tell me what the part number is for your engine air filter. If you have it saved, not a problem. You got to start researching it. It may take you hours to find that part number. So it's quite interesting. There's great opportunity there for cost savings, and there's opportunity there for you to be ripped off by, some local repair shops too. They buy them parts as cheap as they can get, and then they charge you as much as they possibly can. So you got to keep that in mind. Sometimes when you go to these local repair shops, they say, oh yeah, we want to replace, we recommend we replace this part, that part, and the other part. You're like, okay, well, that's fine, but when you're done, I want the old parts. Why is that? It's because some repair shops, they don't necessarily put on new parts. They tell you they do, but then they don't. So that's where the rip-off feature comes along. And if you ask for your old parts, then they have to put on the newer part. It's like they're like, well, what are you gonna do with the old parts? You're like, I just want my old parts. And what it is you're verifying that they took the old part off and they put the new part on. But if you're at Freightliner or Detroit Diesel certified mechanic shop, you don't have to worry about that. But if you're at a place that looks a little etchy and like, yeah, these guys, I have no idea, if they're good or not. I better ask for my parts. so you could do that, but there's a lot that goes into it. How much you want to dive in, it's up to you. All right, guys, that's all I got for you. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the internet.